Hey guys, Extraa here and welcome to my CarX Street tuning guide. In this video, we're going to break down all the major tuning categories to help you build cars that are faster, grippier, and more predictable so that you can spend less time trying to tune and figuring out the weird handling in this game and just more time enjoying the game itself. We're going to cover everything from differentials, suspension, wheels and tires, alignment, and even dive into some more fine tuning stuff like dampers, caster, toe, and Ackermann, and kind of explain what each of these things really do, all specifically tuned within CarX Street's physics engine. Whilst this game does have a pretty solid foundation in realism when it comes to the tuning, it definitely has its quirks. So all the information in this video is specific to CarX Street. Now, whilst it does have some basis in real life, all this stuff has been refined over the last year or so by myself and my tuning practice and driving in-game. Also, stick around till the end of the video. I'm going to be releasing my custom tuning assistant tool. I've mentioned it a few times on my channel. I've built it with ChatGPT and trained it using my own tuning theory and logic. It is designed to help diagnose issues with your handling and your tuning setup. It analyzes your current settings and helps you build upon it and improve it to get your car handling the way you want. And that's going to be fully available inside my Discord community server, which I'm also launching with this video. You can get that tool, which has been publicly released there already. You can get advice on your setups from other top drivers and tuners within the game. You can share your setups and steal setups from other people who have shared them, and then just connect with other tuners, drifters, racers, whatever your flavor. There's going to be something for it within my Discord server. Before jumping ahead and just skipping straight to that custom GPT tool though, it actually works best if you've already got a good baseline tune. So follow along with this guide, dial in your base setup and learn how to get your car feeling right and getting a basic understanding of what each tuning setting does before jumping ahead to that ChatGPT tool. It's pretty likely that this video is going to be quite long, so I'm going to do my best to put chapters in for every single section. And if you're going to watch the whole thing, go make yourself a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, grab a beer, whatever it is that you're enjoying, and get ready to lock in for a long one. So without further ado, let's just dive straight into it. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to cover in this video, or rather not cover, is engines. And the reason for this is the engines are what changes the most frequently within the meta of CarX Street. Whenever new cars are added, there's more motors. A lot of patches kind of change the weights and power figures and the tuning on how engines work. So I don't want to put that information in this video because it's very likely that, maybe in a month or two down the road, it's going to be completely outdated. So I'm just not going to cover it. You can go look up meta setups of people who have done time attacks in like the last week or two. Those are always going to be around and you'll be able to copy their engine setups to get an idea of what is the best for the current meta. But everything else within this video, differential, suspension, for those things to change, the actual core physics of the game would need to be changed, which is very unlikely. So let's dive straight into those instead. All right, let's dive into our first real topic within this video, and that is going to be differentials. I do actually have a full differential guide I posted a few months ago on this channel that is a much more in-depth look into how differentials work and how each setting affects the handling of the car. I'm not super happy with the overall quality of that video, but the information in that video is still relevant and valuable. So if you wanted a deep dive, definitely check that one out after this video. But for our first general overview, let's dive into it here. So the differential controls how your car delivers power to the wheels during acceleration, deceleration, and cornering. So basically every single stage of driving. We get a few different differential options to choose from in CarX. There's the open diff, which is virtually useless. Just don't ever use it, maybe for cruising, and that's basically it. We have the welded diff, which is pretty much only good for drifting, but even in a lot of scenarios, it's not the best. We have the viscous 60, which is a viscous LSD, which is also known as the racing differential in this game. It gives a very smooth and gradual locking feel, which means it's not very aggressive and makes it quite user-friendly. The way it does this is it uses fluid between clutch discs or shims, and they lock once the wheels slip at different rates, which means it can feel a bit lazy because the wheels actually need to slip before the diff can lock. It does this because it uses a fluid between these clutch plates and shims. Once the wheels start spinning at different rates, the fluid heats up and changes the viscosity, hence viscous LSD, and this increases the friction, which then means the wheels are going to lock up. So this diff can be good for beginners, but you can't actually change the acceleration and deceleration lock, just the preload. So it's a bit limited. All right, the final differential type you can get in this game is the clutch LSD. That's the clutch 45 and 65 options. These are a bit of a step up from the viscous racing diff in complexity and in how good they are. So they can be a bit daunting because you get a lot of adjustability and you need to kind of understand how it works. But then once you do understand it, you get a huge benefit from tuning this and really dialing it in. We get a few options in order to do that. So the first one is preload, which is also available on the viscous diff. What preload does is sets the base level of lock. So when the car's not doing anything at all, even when it's turned off, that's how locked up the differential is. We get acceleration lock. That's how much the differential locks up when you're on throttle. And then deceleration lock, which is how much the differential locks up when you're braking or engine braking, like lifting off. Here is some basic tuning advice for the differential. Is your car too twitchy on corner entry? You probably need to raise your preload. Are you spinning out when you're on throttle, like on corner exit? Your acceleration lock needs to be lowered. If the car feels really unsettled and horrible when you're braking, you probably need more deceleration lock. And if the car feels too tight and understeers into corners like it doesn't want to turn, you need to lower your preload or your deceleration lock. To wrap up with the differentials here, I'm actually going to give you some baseline settings to try on your car with the clutch 65 diff. So for rear wheel drive, you want a medium preload setup. So somewhere in that 40 to 60 range. You want a medium to high acceleration lock so you can get the most power down on exit. Somewhere in that 0.6 to 0.8 is normally where I start, and then a relatively low deceleration lock in that 0.3 to 0.4 range. This is going to help you get a lot of power down on exit and help the car rotate and be very free and flowy in the tighter corners. For front wheel drive, you want a very, very low preload. So when you're off throttle, the car rotates as much as possible. I normally start at about 20, even 0 in some cars, but 20 is a good starting point. You want a very high acceleration lock. This game really gets a lot of traction from having very, very high lock, and you need that as much as possible in the front wheel drive cars to stop the inside wheel from rotating. So I normally start at like 0.7 and work up to around 0.9 depending on the car. And then you basically don't want deceleration lock at all. I normally start with none, and if the car feels really unstable, you can kind of bump it up to that 0.2, but I wouldn't go any higher than that, otherwise the car's not going to want to turn. For all-wheel drive cars, this is where it gets a little bit complicated. You're going to want a medium kind of preload setting for both the front and rear differential. So 40 to 70 is where I normally start, but you definitely want higher preload on the back of the car because this is going to promote that rotation and help eliminate that understeer a little bit that is very, very common in this game. For acceleration lock, it gets a little bit weird. So some cars really benefit from a more front wheel drive kind of setup. So you'd run like a 0.7 to 0.9 acceleration in the front and a 0.4 to 0.6 in the rear. I do this in a few of my time attack setups if you've used any of them, and it really helps promote stability and traction on corner exit. For other cars though that are a little bit more stubborn to rotate, you're going to want to flip this around the other way and make it a little bit more lively when you're on throttle. So for those ones, you'd want to run the 0.4 to 0.6 acceleration lock on the front and 0.7 to 0.9 on the back. There's no real good way to tell which is going to be best. You're going to have to experiment with both of these configurations and figure out which suits the car that you're tuning and suits your driving style the best. For deceleration lock on all-wheel drive, you want to keep this somewhere in the middle. Probably 0.3 to 0.5 is really where I start most of the time, but you definitely want it slightly lower on the front so that the front diff unlocks more when you're braking to help the car turn in and really eliminate that corner entry understeer. Okay, so now that we're done with the differential section, let's dive into suspension, which is the meat and potatoes of how the car handles in this game and in real life. So the suspension controls how the weight transfers around the car, how bumps are absorbed, and really just how the car handles in every different cornering and weight scenario. Dialing this in properly is going to completely transform the way your car drives. The first thing we're going to look at is ride height. Now, it's no secret that lower ride height in most cases means more grip. You don't want to go too crazy with this as cars bottom out, and it's going to limit the suspension travel, but lower generally is better. From there, you can fine tune this a little bit by implementing something called rake. So with a lot of my tunes, if you've used them, they're going to notice that the front of the car sits lower than the rear. So that's a positive rake. So this kind of helps improve turn in, and for most cars is going to be the best way to set it up. I would still start off with the ride height completely even, as that's the best starting point. You know, to start with a completely flat and balanced base. And then when you are adjusting this rake, keep it very subtle, very small changes, because even just like a couple of clicks can completely change the way the car handles. I'm not going to give you any baseline settings for this one because it's going to change based on your spring rates and the tires and every single car you use. So we'll have to dial this in at the end. Now that we've kind of had an overview on ride height, let's dive into spring rates. So in general, stiffer springs means sharper and more responsive handling, and it removes body roll. But softer springs are going to make the car a little bit more compliant, easier to drive, and actually give you a little bit more grip. So for a general rule of thumb, you're going to want a slightly stiffer rear end for rear wheel drive cars, slightly stiffer front end in front wheel drive cars, and in all wheel drive cars, you can keep it pretty balanced, but air more onto the side of a rear wheel drive setup, so slightly stiffer in the back. This kind of helps all wheel drive cars rotate a little bit more and overcome that understeer problem that they normally have. For a spring stiffness baseline, I almost always start between 100 and 110, both front and rear, when I'm making my tunes. From there, you're going to want to adjust these values based on balance and feel. You can slightly stiffen the end of the car that needs more response, or soften the end that needs more grip. There is a bit of an oddity that I want to make note of when it comes to the suspension stiffness and spring rates in this game, and you would have noticed this if you followed along in any of my time attack tunes, specifically ones that are really, really fast. It's actually best to completely bottom the suspension out in some cars. And what I'm talking about here is with the rear, you run the springs at the softest possible setting and the lowest possible setting. And in the front, you run the lowest possible setting with a kind of medium to stiff spring rate. For some reason, this kind of tricks the game into putting the suspension into a fully compressed state, and it makes the car behave like it's completely rigid. You know, this massively improves grip and predictability, even though it's completely unrealistic. You know, it doesn't work on all cars, but if you're really struggling to get the suspension dialed in, especially if you're pushing time attack leaderboards, this is a really, really good Hail Mary trick to try and see if it works, because there's a pretty good chance that it will. It's just really ugly. So if you can avoid it, I would, but definitely try it out and keep it in mind. The next thing we're going to talk about here is anti-roll bars or sway bars. These are going to control how much the car resists against the body roll during cornering and weight transfer, and they also influence how connected each side of the car feels. So obviously stiffer anti-roll bars means less body roll, but it also means the car is going to be a lot more responsive, and softer anti-roll bars are going to promote more grip, but it's going to make the car feel a little bit more numb, but more compliant and easy to drive. For grip racing setups, my baseline setting is to run the back all the way stiff. Because this game is inherently understeery, having this maximum stiffness is going to make the rear of the car really twitchy and responsive, which helps it rotate through corners and overcome that understeer that this game inherently has. And then for the front, you want to run it very soft. So somewhere around that 25 to 40 range, I normally just start at 30. That softer front anti-roll bar gives you more front end grip, especially on the initial turn in, which is again going to help the car rotate. One quick note and tip, I guess, when it comes to the suspension tuning in this game, specifically with the sway bars, is that they seem to make the biggest difference compared to everything else on the car when you're tuning the suspension. So if you're having understeer or oversteer issues, this is kind of the first place you should be looking. So obviously if the car is really twitchy and really rotatey, you can soften the rear sway bar. And if the car feels really lazy when you're trying to turn it in, you can soften the front sway bar. This is where you really want to be looking first. Now that we've had a look at the sway bars, we're actually going to skip completely over the alignment settings and come back to them after, and we're going to dive straight into the damper setup. So what the dampers do is they give us fine control over each of the suspension movements. So where the springs kind of give us the limits of how much the suspension moves, the dampers are going to control how fast these movements happen. CarX gives us a few different options to be able to fine tune these things. The biggest difference is going to be the fast versus the slow dampers. So what the slow dampers do, the way you can think about it in the most simple terms, is the slow ones control the way the car itself handles, and the fast ones control how the car handles external forces. So more in depth at this, for each of these settings, slow bump is going to change how much the car resists compression during weight transfers and during braking and turning specifically. Fast bump is going to control how much and how fast the suspension can compress when it hits bumps like curbs and road bumps and like the dirt lines and things like that. Slow rebound is going to control how quickly the car returns to its normal state after these slow compressions like turning and weight transfer and braking. And fast rebound is going to be how quickly the suspension returns to its original state after hitting big drops or after hitting curbs. So as a baseline setup, the untuned ultimate dampers are actually pretty okay, but if you want a slightly better starting point, you can lower all the bump settings by one large tuning notch and raise all of the rebound settings by one large notch. What this is going to do is going to give the suspension more ability to be able to compress over bumps smoothly and absorb big impacts, whilst also making sure the car recovers and resets to its original position more easily, which is going to reduce the floatiness and the bounciness of the car whilst keeping grip as consistent as possible over bumps and through corners and braking zones. Okay, so now that we've got our dampers set up, let's go back to the alignment settings that we skipped over just before. The first is camber, and it is perhaps the most simple of all of them. All it does is adds cornering grip by increasing the tire contact patch whilst turning, because when you're turning a corner, all that weight transfers to the outside edge of the car. It's going to roll those tires up onto their edge if you don't have any camber. But if you do have camber, those tires will actually be flat. The best baseline range to set in CarX is between -2 and -4 degrees of camber on the front, and between -1 and -2 degrees of camber on the rear. One thing to note is that the camber adjustment isn't the live adjustment that's on the car. So what you're seeing in the tuning menu is not the same as what is actually being displayed on the car. So what you have to do is kind of angle the camera so you can see how much camber the wheels actually have. And whilst it doesn't give you an actual measurement, you can make sure that the balance of front to rear camber is correct. So you always want a little bit more front than rear. Now that we've done the camber setup, the next most simple setting within the alignment is probably going to be the toe angle. So what toe does is it adjusts where the wheels are sitting in their neutral position. So if you have toe out, which is negative toe, that is going to mean the wheels, the front of the wheels, is pointing out away from the car. If you have toe in, which is positive toe, that means the front of the wheels is going to be pointing in towards the car. And what these two adjustments do, toe out promotes turn in and agility. So this can help, if you do this on the front, it can help the car turn in more aggressively. And if you do it on the back, it's going to make the car rotate more freely. And toe in does the opposite. It gives more stability, but can make the car a little bit lazy to turn in. So if you did that on the front, for example. But if you do it on the back, it can actually help reduce wheel spin on power. So like on corner exit, for example. You don't actually really want to use toe adjustments if you can avoid it. So when you add toe, you're introducing rolling resistance to the wheels. So what that does is it means the car's going to have a harder time accelerating, and it's not going to reach as much of a top speed as if you were running the toe at 0. So it should be the last thing you adjust. Say you've done your full suspension setup and the car still doesn't want to turn in. You can try adding some toe out on the front, like -0.1, and see how that feels. Or say you've done the whole suspension setup and you just cannot stop the rear from sliding when you're exiting corners, start adding some positive toe to the back of the car. Maybe plus 0.2 is probably as far as I would go, and see if that fixes it. But you definitely just want to use it as that last step of fine tuning, because the penalty you get for acceleration and top speed is pretty drastic. The next thing we're going to talk about here is caster, and what caster does is it affects the angle of the shock tower relative to the hub within the wheel well. I don't think it's as in-depth as that in the game. I don't think that actually happens, but what it does do is it still gives us the benefits of running a high or a low caster. The two main benefits and the two things that change the most by adjusting this setting is the self-centering force of the wheels, and having a higher caster is going to increase that self-centering and the resistance of the steering, which gives us a lot of high-speed stability at the cost of maneuverability. But what it also does is it increases the rate of camber gain whilst steering. And as we covered when we're talking about camber, having that more camber when you're turning helps keep the outside wheel flat against the road surface whilst we're steering. This is especially effective in low speed corners, like really tight hairpins, for example, where we're gonna want that higher caster. So the more we're turning, like turning around hairpins, we're turning at full lock, we're gonna have more camber biting into that road surface. So we actually want to run a high caster to overcome the understeery feeling within the game, which is a little bit counteractive and counterintuitive, because you would think running a lower caster is going to make the car feel a lot more nimble, which it can do at high speed. But at low speeds especially, I kind of try and start at like the 10 degrees of caster range and bump it up. Even on some cars that specifically are 4-time attacks that have a lot of hairpins, or on Togo cars, I run it at maximum. So start at about 10 degrees and work up from there if the car is understeering a lot. The next thing we're going to talk about here is Ackermann angle and steering angle. I'm going to group these together because the effects of adjusting these kind of are the same desired outcome. So with steering angle for grip driving, you don't really need more than, I'd say, 55-ish degrees of steering angle. That's probably the max I really go. Maybe push it to like 58 on some cars. But what you're going to get from increasing steering angle is a lot of understeer. So if you are limited by steering in tight corners, the culprit is probably going to be your Ackermann angle. Now, what is Ackermann? Ackermann controls the difference in steering rate between the inside and outside wheels. So more Ackermann means your inside front wheel is going to turn more than the outside wheel, effectively tightening your turning radius. Now, CarX has a weird thing with Ackermann where it doesn't really do what it says it's actually doing, and the values are reversed, and you can't run reverse Ackermann, which is kind of strange. But anyway, what this means for us is that 0% Ackermann is actually the maximum positive Ackermann you can run. That's the most Ackermann, whereas 100% Ackermann is no Ackermann. It's completely parallel steering. So what does Ackermann actually do in terms of handling? So if you have more Ackermann, which is a lower value in game, you're gonna get better low speed rotation, and you're gonna have a stronger initial bite on corner entry grip. But especially at high speeds, the downside is if you have too much Ackermann, you're gonna scrub speed, or your front tires are gonna push and understeer. Running less Ackermann, which is a higher value in game, what you're going to get from that is more stability. Especially at high speeds, the car's going to be significantly more stable, but you're going to have a lot weaker turn in. And you're also going to have less tire scrubbing, like less pushing. So the transitions between, say, left to right turns is going to be much more predictable. So this means that whilst you can go all the way to 0% and effectively get the very tightest and most corner entry grip you possibly can, there's a balance that you're going to need to find of adding Ackermann without having the tires push and exceed that value where you are gaining grip. The baseline that I use across all my grip builds is I start at 35% Ackermann on all my builds and adjust from there, depending on the track and depending on the car. And the car matters a lot for this. And the reason why is track width actually affects your Ackermann value a lot. So if you have a wider front track width, which means if you have more spaces or the front of your car is just wider in general from wheel to wheel, your Ackermann effect is multiplied less. So you're going to have less Ackermann effectively. So if you get into a car with 35 Ackermann, for example, and then go put a body kit on it, that 35 Ackermann's not going to feel the same. You might have to change that to 30 Ackermann to have the exact same steering feel from that Ackermann, like the same turning rate. So the wider your front track means you need more Ackermann, or a lower value in game, to achieve the same feel in steering. Okay, let's dive into the final tuning parameters of the suspension tuning menu, and that is going to be the brakes. So we have braking power and brake bias adjustments. The braking power is pretty simple. Just max it out because there's no negatives to it in this game. But brake bias is a very, very, very sensitive adjustment that's going to change the way your car specifically enters corners. So that's going to control how the brake force is distributed between the front and rear wheels. And this has a very big play on stability and rotation. And as a general rule of thumb, if you want more stability when you're braking, you're going to want to push your brake bias forwards to the front, which is a higher percentage, and more rear bias is going to give you more rotation. So what you want to do is start at probably 55%, which is the default value, is a very good starting point. It's a very safe starting point. And if you want to get a little bit more in depth for a little bit more of an optimal braking force as a starting point, what you can do is you can take the weight balance of the car. So say your car is 55% front biased, then add a little bit to that percentage and make that your brake bias. So if your car's 55% front biased on weight, then maybe a 58% brake balance would be best for that car. And that's a rule I used to follow and still do, especially for time attack cars. But then as another example, if your car's understeering a lot on corner entry, moving that brake bias backwards is going to help unsettle the rear of the car and allow the front tires to turn more freely. So you kind of need to play with this a little bit, and every percentage actually does make a very, very big difference. And you definitely don't want to go too far in either direction either. Otherwise you're going to get a lot of instability under braking. Okay, so now that the brakes are done, that actually means our entire suspension tuning page should be filled in with some baseline values. And if you have been following along and putting these baseline values in, then you should have something that looks like this. Now, this is actually out of my tune saving spreadsheet, and this is my baseline setup template that I put on every single car before I start fine tuning individual settings. So if you've got something that looks like this, you're at a very, very good starting point. Now that we've got our suspension set up, let's have a look at setting up our wheels and tires and getting our tire pressures and profiles and sizes dialed in. So the first thing we want to look at is tire width. Now, obviously a wider tire means more rubber and more grip, and that of course carries over into this game, but we can play around with our widths to kind of help the car handle in the way that we want it to. For example, obviously with a rear-wheel drive and an all-wheel drive car, you want the widest possible tires on the back to get the most grip under power. So that's a 345. Now, in this game, if you have a look at the grip values, when you're doing these rear tire setups, you're going to see that it doesn't increase past a 1.08, which is at a 265 wide tire. This doesn't mean that the 265 has just as much grip as a 345. So in this game, there is tire flex and sidewall flex, and the bigger tires change the way that the tire and sidewalls flex happens. So having that bigger tire still gives you a grip advantage over someone running a 265. You could also run a 345 on the front. What I find is that if you run the full size tire on the front, you actually get a very lazy turn in because there is mass incorporated into the wheels and tires. So my optimal setup for a rear wheel drive and all wheel drive car is a 325 front with a 345 rear. And then for a front wheel drive car, you want to flip this value. So you'd run the 345 on the front and a 325 on the rear. And what this is going to do is it's going to give you all the benefits of having that really wide tire with the wide tires, sidewall and rubber flex values, but you still get the nimble feeling of having the slightly slimmer tire on your non-powered wheels. Okay, so now that we have our wheel width and our wheel diameter set, the next thing we have to look at is tire profile. And tire profile has a massive play on the way the car handles, much like the wheel diameter. You can run massive rear tires and play around with the tractor build setup with this as well, much like I was saying with the wheel diameter settings. Again, I wouldn't recommend it. The baseline I set here is stock profile on the front, so nothing, and then a +5 on the back. And that is always going to be racing tires. Like I said, there is a tire flex system in this game and a sidewall flex system. So if you run these stretch tires, it pretty much eliminates that. So you never want to use that on a grip car. Always stick to racing tires. What this +5 rear profile and stock front profile does is it gives us some of the benefits of the boosts in acceleration and top speed, but because we're utilizing that tire flex and that larger profile, we don't really get a torque penalty like you would if you just lengthened the gears in the gear ratios. Having that additional tire flex also helps us with grip transitions, so things like launching, things like taking tight corners, left, right, and even just putting power down coming out of turns. It's going to be a much smoother transition into that grip scenario. So there's going to be less tire spin and things like that. So I really think this is the optimal way to set it up. And on front wheel drive cars, I just run it the same front and back. So no profile change at all. Now that we have all that set, let's look at the tuning menu for the wheels and tires, which lets us adjust tire pressure and wheel spaces. Tire pressure, super simple, just set it at 3, which is the maximum. It gives us heaps of grip on the Racing Plus tires because they're so grippy, and having the pressure all the way up lowers our rolling resistance, which means we get more acceleration and more top speed. So that's just the best all the time, just to run it at maximum. As for the wheel spaces, there's a little bit more nuance with these. These are a little bit more in depth. As a general rule of thumb, for rear wheel drive and all-wheel drive, you want to run the front spaces narrower than the back. This is going to give the car more rotation, and it's going to make the front of the car feel a lot lighter and more responsive, which is a bit weird. It shouldn't really feel like that, but it's just the way the physics of this game work. So what I do for this is I set the back wheels as wide as they can go without sticking out of the guards, and then I match the front wheels to that and then put them into like 2 to 4 clicks. For front wheel drive cars, you want to flip this around. So you want the wider tires on the front, or the wider spaces on the front, sorry. And then on the back, you want to narrow them in a little bit. And this is going to help the back of the car rotate around the front and help point the front where it needs to go, which minimizes the understeer. Keep in mind, changing the spacer values, like I said in the alignment section of this video, is going to mess with our Ackermann settings. So these two need to be taken in consideration and changed together. Also, if you're changing body kits in the styling shop, different body kits have different track widths, and these don't always reflect in the numbers in the tuning shop. So be careful which body kits you're putting on, because some of them make the back so wide that you cannot run the right configuration of the spaces to get the optimal grip. And then also you need to visually check, make sure that the rear wheels and the front wheels are sitting where they need to be based on what you can visually see, because the numbers in the tuning shop don't always tell you the full story. So check visually, go outside and line it up in a straight line and make sure that either the front or the rear is narrower based on how your car is set up, front wheel drive, rear wheel drive, all-wheel drive, for example. All right, moving on from our wheels and tires, let's start talking about downforce and weight reduction, all the things within the body section of the tuning shop. Firstly, let's talk about downforce. So both downforce and weight do play a big role in how the car handles, especially at high speeds when it comes to downforce. Setting them up properly is really crucial for creating a well-balanced build that's gonna drive the way you want it to. So with downforce, let's dive into this a little bit. Front downforce, you're always gonna wanna run maximum front downforce, whether that's ultimate or prototype. Regardless of whether you think you need the downforce or not, running this downforce just gives you more grip, and it also unlocks the air resistance tuning slider in the tuning menu. So you can run maximum downforce for more front grip, which helps with this game's inherently understeery handling. Plus you can adjust that air resistance back down, so you're just getting the grip for free basically, or just the cost of the upgrade. Rear downforce though is another story. So adding rear downforce also gives you a penalty to air resistance, but you cannot adjust the air resistance back down. So what you want to do is keep rear downforce as low as possible. You'll notice with a lot of my tunes, if you've used any of them, they either run like level 1 or level 2 downforce, or even none at all. So I would always, when you're setting up these cars, keep rear downforce stock and only increase it if the rear end of the car has no grip at high speed. That's the only time, and then you'd only increase it to like level 1 or level 2 at the maximum. You should be able to get the rest of the grip from the suspension tuning. You shouldn't need to run maximum downforce. It is not worth the air resistance penalty. So the goal here is you really want to maximize our front end grip to get the most rotation and minimize the air resistance. It's maximizing the efficiency of downforce versus drag. So yeah, max downforce on the front, minimum air resistance, and as little downforce as possible on the back. Now that we have the downforce set up, let's have a look at the weight reduction and weight balance upgrades and tuning. It is the best thing in this game to always run the cars as light as they possibly can be. If you look at the leaderboards, you will commonly see cars that are well under 1,000 kilos. They just outperform heavier cars in every area, in acceleration, in cornering, even in some cases top speed. The light cars are just super fast. There's not that many super straight long roads in this game, so the acceleration you gain from having a lighter car will normally mean you reach a higher top speed on those shorter straights than you would if you had a heavier car. So always run it at the minimum weight possible. That means maximum weight reduction and the maximum body swap you can do. The other reason you want to run these high weight reduction upgrades is because it also unlocks the center of gravity and the weight distribution slider. The ideal weight distribution in this game, for the most part, is going to be a 50-50 weight balance. And this is something that is also common in real life. There are arguments to be made where you can vary this a little bit depending on the car and track, but as a general baseline, always aim for a 50-50 weight balance. And also you want to lower the car's center of gravity as much as possible, because a lower center of gravity is going to improve our body roll. It's going to stop the car from wanting to flip over when you hit bumps, and it's going to reduce the weight transfer in corners. That's going to make a more stable platform and give us more grip overall. And you can also add in one of the larger fuel tanks, and although they do add weight, they bring the center of gravity down even more. So you can get that center of gravity really, really, really low and almost eliminate body roll and the car wanting to flip at all. Some builds, like I said, do benefit from running a slight rear bias on weight, and some builds also do benefit from running a higher center of gravity because that actually increases your acceleration, your top speed. But as a general rule of thumb, you always want to start off with the car as light as possible, as close to 50-50 weight distribution as you can, and the lowest center of gravity as you can achieve. That's going to be the best baseline to start from. This is also the reason why some cars are inherently not great in this game. For example, a lot of the Porsches, rear engine cars in particular, the weight balance is just so bad, and it's so hard to get it close to that 50-50 without doing extremely light engine swaps. You can make it work, but for the most part, that's why these cars are so far outside of what would be considered meta. So you just want to keep that in mind as well when you're picking these cars. That's why these smaller cars that have a much more balanced weight distribution are so favorable in this game. Just remember, tuning is all about finding a balance that's going to work for you. A fast tune for me might not be easy to drive and maybe won't be fast for you. And that goes for any other driver and tuner on this game and on this platform. So it's valuable to know what every single thing in the tuning menu actually does and learn how to adjust those things to make a car drive the way you want and to suit your driving style, especially if you aren't pushing leaderboard times and you don't need to be min-maxing things. You can make your cars drive much more consistent and much more fun if you understand how everything works. And remember, I did release a custom ChatGPT tuning assistant, which I mentioned at the start of this video. I've built that on the tuning logic and theory I've given you in this video, and I've refined it over the past few months. It's been through several testing phases with a lot of my friends, and the feedback has been incredibly positive. It is still ChatGPT and it does make mistakes, but overall it gives a very, very good guideline and provides very good advice. It's going to work like a virtual co-driver or mechanic, as if you were a professional racing driver. You drive your car, you tell it what your car isn't doing right, whether it's getting too much understeer, it's transitioning too snappily, it's bouncing on curbs. It's going to walk you through potential causes, and it's going to diagnose your issue. It's going to ask for your current suspension and differential settings and things like that. And then not only is it going to tell you what to change, it's going to tell you why it wants to make that change. So you'll be able to learn from it and put that information into practice going forward. And then obviously going to be able to help you refine step after step and keep fine tuning your setup until it's perfect. Just remember, if you've skipped forward to this part of the video, it does work best if you've got a solid baseline tune first. So if you skipped forward to here and you're trying to use the ChatGPT tool, you're going to get a lot more value out of it if you go back and watch through the video, get a good baseline tune together, and then come back here and then try the ChatGPT tool. All right, and that finally brings us to the end of this video. God knows how long it is. At this point, it must be going on for half an hour, maybe even more, but congratulations for getting here if you stuck through the whole thing. If you've got any questions at all, drop them down in the comments. You guys know that I'm good at getting on and replying to them, so if you need any more detail or anything here doesn't make sense, drop a comment. I'm going to do my best to reply to as many as possible and answer all your questions, because I know this game's tuning can be pretty confusing and unintuitive. Also, make sure you drop a like on this video. It does great things for the algorithm. It helps me out, and it's going to help out all the other people who are just getting into this game that need to know more information on tuning. I wish I could help everyone individually, but the only way I can even start to do that is if they get my videos on their homepage or in their suggested videos. So make sure you give it a like, drop those comments, and boost this video so I can get my reach up and reach as many eyes as possible. That's going to be it for today. Once again, thank you guys for watching. Thank you so much for the support, and make sure you use my ChatGPT tool and join my Discord, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks, guys.